One night, Kamala was the funniest story ever. He was, he was kind of new in the business, and I just wrestled against him up in Nashville, and I pulled him over about halfway down to Memphis and pulled him off on the side of the interstate, and he's standing there on the interstate, big old Kamala with his hands on top of his head. And so I'm up behind him. I said, "Okay, raise your right foot up in the air." He's standing there on one leg with his hands on top of his head. I said, "Okay, now jump up and down." And finally he turns around and looks and he goes, "Oh, Jerry."
Hey, you know what? I was down. I was just fixing to get into business. I was playing football at North Texas State University outside of Dallas. I'd go up, watch a Friday night show at the Sportatorium. I'd go to the Saturday morning television taping. And, all of a sudden, here comes Kamala, the Ugandan giant. And y'all did these videos of him. And these were shot in Hendersonville, right there on Jerry Jarrett's property, right?
Yeah, it looked like it was Africa, didn't it?
It did, but break down how Kamala was created, because that was a great gimmick, and people bought into Kamala, man, because, man, when he come down with that hand strike, that was the real deal.
Yeah, it was. Well, I'll tell you what, it was one Monday night. We were having wrestling at the Mid-South Coliseum, and I remember, we'd stand in the back. The guys could stand in the back and watch from around the corner, watch the matches that were going on out there in the arena. And all the wrestlers would come in this one back entrance. And I'm standing there watching the matches, and all of a sudden I got a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's this big black guy, big tall guy, and he said, "Mr. Lawler, my name's Sugar Bear Harris." And he said, "I live down here in Senatobia, Mississippi." And he said, "I wanted to come up here and wrestle for you guys some if I could." And I don't know what happened. I just looked at him, and I said, "Has anybody seen you yet here tonight? Have you been walking around?" "No, sir, just come in the back door." I said, "Would you go right around there and just sit down in my dressing room? Don't let anybody see you." So he goes back there. I went and got Jerry Jarrett. He and I went back there and looked at him. And I swear, there was this artist named Frank Frazetta who did these great fantasy paintings, and it was, as soon as I saw this guy, this painting came to my mind. There's this famous painting where this beautiful girl is tied to a stake, and a bunch of these cannibals are and they're about to burn her at the stake, and a bunch of these cannibals were all doing this like crazy war dance around this girl. That's this painting, right? And that just came to my mind, and so I told Jerry, I said, "Man, I could paint this guy up. He could look terrific." So we told him to be in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Jerry had a 100-acre farm up there in Hendersonville. We took him up there the next day. I pulled out a National Geographic, and if you remember, the reason it was hot was at the time, the president of Uganda was Idi Amin, and he was a cannibal. He was a confessed cannibal.
Wow.
And this guy was the president of Uganda, and that was in the news all over the place. And so that's why it made it topical. And I looked at some pictures. I brought that picture of that painting that Frank Frazetta had done, and I painted Kamala's face. I painted James Harris's face up just like one of those cannibals in that picture. And we looked into the map of Uganda in National Geographic, and Kamala was actually a name of a city in the country of Uganda. And so that's where we came up with the name, literally honed a spear out of a stick and put a wooden point on the end of it, and put this old loincloth on him, took him out in Jerry's back on some acreage back there, and got a couple of pieces of dry ice and threw him out in this kind of little swampy lake that Jerry had, and we put James out there and turned the cameras on and had him come walking through the smoke, and it looked like, it literally looked like he was an African giant that was walking towards the screen. And it was just one of those things that it just clicked, man. We called up and had J.J. Dillon, who was had not ever been in our territory, because we wanted to make him so totally different. So we had J.J. Dillon cut a promo. We explained it to him, and he cut a promo saying that he had found this savage beast while touring the world, and he was going to bring him to the United States, and his first stop was going to be Memphis, Tennessee. And like you said, at the time, man, if you did things right, people bought into it, and they believed that this guy was a giant African cannibal that was being released every time he set foot in the ring, and he couldn't have worked more perfectly. I mean, we had to keep it simple, so that's where the chops came in, all the chops and the slapping himself on the stomach, and he didn't do much more than that. And to bite you, you bite you, and suddenly next thing you know, you're bleeding. And I watched some of the tapes of he and I having that first match, and it was like magic. I mean, he started biting my head, I started bleeding. He would touch my head with his fingers, and start licking the blood off his fingers, and it was just, it really looked exactly like what we told the people he was, And
I remember that first when y'all did that first video. I mean, there was like a 20 or 30-second clip y'all sent out, and it was like showed him walking just like you said, and whoever did the voiceover is basically like Kamala, the Ugandan giant.
Right.
Kamala. That was it.
Yep.
I was like, I got to see this son of a bitch. This son of a bitch is crazy looking. Whose idea was it? Was the moon and the stars on him?
That all came from the painting.
It was great.
That Frank Frazetta. I'll show you sometime. This Frank Frazetta. Later on became friends with him. He was one of the greatest artists of all time. But anyway, that was just the way that the guy's body was decorated in that painting. And it's a funny story. For months, every night I would paint Kamala. I would do his face and all the paint on him down in the locker room beforehand, and I would paint those stars and the big the crescent moon on his stomach in yellow, and the stars on his pecs were white. And the funny story, one night after about 3 or 4 months of painting James, and you'd have to know him. He was just a big old teddy bear. Actually, that's what he used to wrestle as before Kamala. He wrestled as Sugar Bear Harris. But anyway, he just kept sitting there, and I'd paint him up, and he'd be patient. And then one day, finally, after about 3 months, he looked down. He said, "Jerry, I want to ask you a question." I said, "What's that, James?" He said, "Why did you paint the big banana on my stomach every night?" I said, "James, it's not a banana. It's a crescent moon." He went, "Oh, okay."
All that time he thought it was a banana and it's a
I guess
rib.
he thought I was making some kind of joke on him or something like that.
Oh, Jesus, that's
He
great.
thought I was painting a big banana on his stomach.